Good afternoon. Welcome to the Gender Speaker Live show on Sunday the 20th, last day of summer. Autumn begins tomorrow. Well, today we're talking about Shakespeare and his secret love. Hi and welcome. Well, Shakespeare and his secret love. Well, there's so much that's been written about Shakespeare and was he gay and what was happening and what about the lost years. And I've read quite a lot about this because I've been a big fan of Shakespeare ever since when I was at college at the age of 19. I managed to get myself into the college play, and they only had one part there. It's obviously when I was still living male, and they only had one major part available. They were doing Julius Caesar, and a friend of mine had encouraged me to go in and join the drama group, and I got in there and found that they needed somebody in the part of Mark Antony, and there were auditions taking place. So, well, I almost learnt the entire big Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech and got myself in and got the part. And as a consequence of that, had to go do some drama courses. In fact, the entire drama course is what I chose to do. And that's probably what started me on my path to public speaking and what I'm doing today, learning to perform Mark Antony for 6 nights. It's a big part and a really fun play. So I got into Shakespeare at that stage, not because I was learning it for English, but because I was actually performing it and trying to understand and learn it. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happened with Shakespeare and some of the questions that people don't know, because I can't say that what I'm going to say is the truth. But I get this sense, I've read a lot, and some things gel with me. Some things I think that just doesn't feel right. And other things I think, oh my God, that just makes so much sense. So I'm going to give you my sense of what was happening and maybe just open your eyes to some of the things that were happening. So let's start off by looking at Shakespeare. Born 1564, died 1616. So what I want you to put in context is, last week, I did some history. We're talking about the Buggery Act, 1533. So, we're at the time Shakespeare's born. And in fact, when we look at it, we'll find that the Buggery Act, 1533, reenacted by Elizabeth after Mary's death, a little while after the death, Elizabeth put that act back in place. Elizabeth, definitely a Protestant, and was shifting things back from Mary's reign which had been trying to get rid of Protestantism and bring Catholicism back and get back towards the Pope. She died after only 6 years, and Elizabeth came back definitely staunch Protestant. Now, Shakespeare's family were Catholic. And of course, lots of families were Catholic, but we're living at a time when having to be very careful, especially as there were groups of people who would really like to undermine what was going on. You've got to understand, 1616, that was the year that the King James Bible was authorized by then James I after Elizabeth's death. But it's also the year, 1607, I think. Well, I can't remember the exact year. This is the time of Guy Fawkes. We celebrate that every November 5th. Guy Fawkes happened during Shakespeare's lifetime, the attempt to blow up the Houses of Parliament. So you can understand there was a lot of tension going on between Protestants and Catholics, very much a force of Protestantism trying to hold things back down. And this conflict between Catholicism and Protestantism was very much a part of affected Shakespeare's life in a great many ways. Now, it's also a time when women were pretty, strictly controlled. Women were prohibited from acting. So Shakespeare grew up in a world where all of the female roles in his plays would have been played by young men. And it would have been boys and very young men, because they would have been, while they still looked fresh-faced, while they could still play a female role. We're not talking about sort of big, bulky blokes in I'll do Calpurnia tonight. No, these were young boys. And very often, and in part of my master's degree, I looked at the impact of the theatres in China, and it's gone out of my mind for now. I should have written it down. But in China, the young boys were brought into the roles again. It was boys who played all the parts. And sometimes a boy would be picked because they were very effeminate, very delicate, very feminine looking, and they could play those roles. Exactly the same, I believe, happened in English theatre during this time. In the sort of 15th century, 16th century, this is what would have happened. It wouldn't have just been, somebody will play the female roles. These characters, the actors who played female roles, always played female roles. They were recruited into the acting groups because they could carry off playing those female roles. And there are quite a few people around who are quite well known through that time. So, women were also prohibited from dressing in a masculine way. In fact, there were lots of rules, and I'm going to come back to some of those in a minute. Women were prohibited from dressing as men or expressing themselves in a male role. And in 1607, around about the end of Shakespeare's life, Thomas Middleton, Thomas Dekker wrote a play called Roaring Girl, all about Mary Frith, a woman who defied the law and was often arrested for it because she liked to carry a rapier, she smoked a pipe, and really went down the pub and had a good old beer with the lads, which was completely and totally forbidden. Women were not allowed to perform in this way. The division between genders in Elizabethan times was quite strict. So let's share screen, and we're going to have a little look at what was happening with Shakespeare. Again, I'm going to do the big screen, so we've got a few little bits on here. You can see I'm just down in the corner here. You can still see me. So what was happening? Let's just have a little look, because I want to try and explore what happened in those missing years of Shakespeare's life. That's really where we're going to be going for this. So, William Shakespeare, these are the images we think of him. There are not very many around, so it's even now questionable whether that is him, but let's just assume it was. 1564, 1616, actor, poet, and playwright. We know he actually acted in his plays. The thing about him is he married Anne Hathaway in 1582 at the age of 18. She was 26 years old. Very, very young. Had 3 children, twins, and Hammett, one of the boy who died. But he didn't spend a lot of time in Stratford, where Anne lived. She lived all the time there. He returned after his sort of career in acting, but something happened, and he pretty much disappeared off the scene. Those lost years from 1583 to 1594, there's a 10-year gap. We know nothing about it. And basically what happened in 1594, suddenly Shakespeare appeared, the talk of town, part owner of a theatre group called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, later to be called the King's Men because they performed for royalty. Lord Chamberlain's Men were a very reputable group. He also was part owner and then owner of the Globe Theatre. So he was very, very much an established person. Now, his family are well connected, and we're going to look at his family in a minute. But his mother came from a very wealthy landowning farm. His father, John Shakespeare, was a glover in Shakespeare and also alderman. So very much a part of Stratford's, ruling elite. Lived in a nice house, but something happened. And there are a variety of different stories. Some say that he was caught trying to poach on someone's land and had to run away and basically was put up by some Catholic friends. Others stories abound, but whatever happened, Shakespeare left Stratford. That's very certain. Didn't spend a lot of his time with Anne. Obviously came back from time to time, but he had to go. And there was a period of time where it looks as if he had to go and vanish and disappear. And it may be that he joined a travelling troupe, Chamberlain's Men, or another group that had been in Stratford, and he joined them because it was very difficult to track and find where they were, because the play groups, acting groups, a bit like rep theatre today, would have travelled around the country performing at various different places, doing their plays, and therefore it was very mobile. He wrote 2 very long poems, the Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece. I've had different spellings. It's Lucrece or Lucrece. Anyway, it's based upon Lucretia, a Roman noblewoman. Venus and Adonis also about Rome. Now, the interesting thing about these is the detail in the poems indicates that Shakespeare has to have visited Italy. And when you look at his plays and you start to see The Merchant of Venice, The Taming of the Shrew, and a number of other plays are set in there, Titus Andronicus, which has got a Roman background to it. All of this indicates that Shakespeare probably spent some time in Italy. And we're not quite sure when, but it's almost certainly during this period of these lost years, he actually was traveling. And he also wrote a lot of sonnets, 154 in total. They weren't published until very late in his life, not entirely clear whether actually that was with Shakespeare's permission or somebody decided to publish them anyway. 126 of those were dedicated to a fair youth, and that's where all of the question comes out. Who was this fair youth? They were apparently dedicated to W.H. But Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece was specifically dedicated to Henry Wriothesley. So we're going to come on to Henry in a minute and see where that is, because he was also a very young man and a very close friend and devotee of Shakespeare, very much a supporter of his plays. Now, I think it's also important to understand that, things were happening. Let me just look at Mary Wriothesley, the Countess of Southampton, also known as Mary Arden, and it seems was connected to or a friend of or very well known to Mary Arden, Shakespeare's mother. And it's through the women connection where this seems to go. These weren't part of the Southampton line, but these were people who, they were wealthy people, connected to the royal family, connected to Elizabeth. In fact, Mary had one son, Henry. When she married the second Earl of Southampton, they had one son, and Henry subsequently married Elizabeth, who became Queen Elizabeth's lady-in-waiting. So the very, very strong connections, which was important because for Shakespeare, the success of his life as a playwright and as a performer was because he was performing for the royal family, and because of that, he was therefore performing at royal houses around the country. Now, the research I've done suggested and shows that at some point he was employed by Mary Wriothesley, a Countess Southampton, employed William as a schoolmaster. On the estate in Hampshire, they have a small grammar school. In fact, it's a grammar school where Nicholas Erdel, remember I talked about him a week ago, he was the headmaster at Eton Boys' School who was charged under the Buggery Act for inappropriate behaviour with the boys, and was then released as a result of a letter from the first Earl of Southampton, and then subsequently went down to Hampshire, where he became headmaster at this school, and then subsequently went on to become headmaster at Winchester School. So there's a bit of a connection already there around the Buggery. But this is where we think everything happened. The Countess of Southampton commissioned William to write 17 sonnets, one for each year of her son Henry's life at that time, because he was a very feminine boy, and we're living in a world where the act of buggery is a capital offence. Not just a capital offence, but an offence that would lose all of your estates, everything. This was a horrendous thing to be charged with. You were charged with buggery. Your family was destitute from that point onwards. So really, really important. And yet these were difficult times. Now, I have to set that said, the first Earl of Southampton had acquired much of his property as a result of the Reformation. Henry VIII had given him some of the property. In fact, where Mary lived, Place House, Titchfield Manor, or Titchfield Abbey, was one of those very places that had been handed on and moved on as a result of the Reformation. And Titchfield Place House in Titchfield clearly seems to have been the site at which Love's Labour's Lost was written, probably performed there. It's probably had its first performance there while Shakespeare was living there, mentoring young Henry, becoming great friends, we believe. So let's have a look at what happened after this. Oh, one more thing just to finally say. London was plagued. London experienced bubonic plague on a regular basis. Now, we should all be aware of this because obviously this was the plagues that killed huge numbers of people. And we've already seen with coronavirus what's been going on. The moment you have a virulent virus that attacks our society, one of the things that has to happen is meeting places get closed down, theatres are shut, and this is exactly what happened. When the plague hit London, the theatres were closed because they were one of the primary areas where the disease was being transmitted between people because they were gathering together in confined spaces. So 1593, 1594, that was one of the last plagues that hit London, and that was obviously a time when Shakespeare could not have been there. And probably would have been a good idea not to have been in the country. So it's quite likely that was the time when he was off in Italy with Henry, doing some traveling, writing plays, and seeing this new life. So let's have a look at Henry, the third Earl of Southampton. Here he is. Now, interestingly, about 15, 20 years ago, somebody found a painting in the Southampton property and said, well, what is this? Who is this painting? And they said, well, we don't know. And this is the painting that they found. And so we said, well, do you know, it looks a little bit like Henry, but as a woman. Now, this is in the days before Photoshop, and this is all about artistic interpretation by an artist. But check it again. This is Henry. There is the painting. Now, the sort of shape of the forehead there, the hands, the style of clothing that's being worn. And this is a painting of 17-year-old Henry. Now, look at those two. Can you see just how similar they are? Minor changes in a painting, style of hair and everything else, more feminine clothing. Very easy. So, and bear in mind, we're living in a world, Shakespeare's in this world, and Henry, very much a devotee of theatre, would have seen young boys playing female roles, may have even played himself. We don't know for sure. Quite likely Shakespeare might have allowed him to be involved in some of the productions. If he's that big a fan of what was going on, I wouldn't be surprised for that to happen. So this is this thing. Now, here's the problem. You're a 17-year-old young man, a little bit too interested in other men, perhaps, bearing in mind the awful penalties for homosexuality. So there would have been a huge amount of pressure to encourage Henry to get married, even if he was gay. You know, one of the things, this is the same, even up into the 1960s, gay men, trans women, what people did was get married because that was a brilliant cover for being gay, for being trans. People didn't suspect, oh, no, they're married men, they're fine. But secretly and quietly, then you can live those lives if you want to. So here's the situation we've got. 17-year-old. We know that Shakespeare wrote those sonnets. They appear to be written towards that. We know that Venus and Adonis was dedicated to Henry. Lots of Italian influence in Shakespeare's plays, indicating that not just that he was interested in Italy, but that he'd probably been there and travelled and seen and experienced life in Italy for quite a period of time, maybe a year or two. He'd actually lived in Italy, lived maybe even in Spain, and experienced continental life, so that became a part of what he wrote about. I think it's quite likely, and maybe found some interesting plays and things that he could translate into English and then rework. Because even like today, once you got the plot, you got the plot. It's been said that actually, since Shakespeare's plays, there's never been an original plot. I can't imagine he invented all of them. I'm sure he grabbed a few from the Greeks, a few from the Romans, and repackaged them just as we do today. So I now want to look at one of Shakespeare's sonnets, because this is the one that gives a huge indication of what might have been going on there. A woman's face with nature's own hand painted, hath thou the master mistress of my passion? Master mistress, what a strange turn of phrase. A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false woman's fashion. This is someone who has the heart of a woman, but has not been socialized as a woman. So we've not got that falsity of upper class aristocratic women. An eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. Is this someone who doesn't flirt as much? Remember that if you are a man that looks like a woman or dresses as a woman, and maybe Henry did dress as a woman quite frequently. I wouldn't be surprised. We have all sorts of evidence of that from Chevalier de Beaumont in France, who's very well known for that. I think it's something that would have happened. Men dressed as women. There's a history of men dressing as women in order to not be caught with other men in a more intimate relationship. If you see a man and a woman, who questions it? A man in hue, all hues in his controlling. Now, this is the line in this poem which really tells us an awful lot. A man in hue. Hue is the word for colour. In Shakespearean time, hue meant colour. All hues in his controlling. All colours in his controlling. In Shakespeare's time, in Elizabethan times, there were sumptuary laws in existence which actually defined which colours you were allowed to wear. So that peasants wore, the common man wore browns and greens. The richer merchants were allowed to wear blues and reds, but only aristocrats were entitled to wear purples and purple, basically. So a man in hue, all hues in his controlling, means we were talking about an aristocrat, somebody from an aristocratic background, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. Someone who actually turns heads, and women say, oh, I can't believe it, that's a man. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature as she wrought thee fell a doting, and by addition me of thee defeated, while adding one thing to my purpose nothing. This is a poem of unrequited love. Nature has created this vision of loveliness and placed her in a man's body, making her completely inaccessible in a world where the Buggery Act rules, where any relationships between men is completely frowned upon. But since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, Shakespeare didn't write things by mistake. Since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy loves use their treasure. I can love this woman, but I can never consummate that love because it's the forbidden one. And I don't think that's a mistake. Pricked thee out. There is Shakespeare's sonnet number 20. Came just after, we've had 17 sonnets about persuading a young man to get married. A couple of other sonnets, which you probably know. Sonnet number 18, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely. That again, another one about the beauty and wonder. Shakespeare fell in love with a young fair boy called Henry Wriothesley, who became his patron. Later on the sonnets, we know that they fell out. Things didn't go so well. But I think there was a time when Shakespeare was in love, but not with Gwyneth Paltrow, with a trans woman called Henry Wriothesley. So there we are. My thoughts about what's happened and what's been happening. Let's get rid of that. Didn't realize that was still there. I think that was the story of Shakespeare. And that's what was happening. So that's my bit of history for today. I should be back tomorrow. I'm putting together some transgender non-binary inclusion training in October, trying to fix the date. A lot going on. The Professional Speaking Association convention from the 5th to the 10th of October. I'm going to be promoting a little bit about that if anybody wants to come along, because it's going to be a fabulous event for anybody interested in speaking. But for now, that's it from me. I shall be back again tomorrow at 4 p.m. and I look forward to seeing you then. Have a fabulous day and see you tomorrow.